Welcome to the Straw Hat Social Club, a One Piece recap show. I'm Todd, the One Piece expert, which is a made-up title that just means I've read the manga, and I'm joined by someone who is completely new to One Piece, the lovely and talented Becca.
Hey.
Hey. So join us today as we travel to Baratie, which covers episodes 19 through 30 of the One Piece anime and chapters 42 through 68 of the manga. Are you excited about this one? Because I
am so excited. I've been waiting for this, and I'm so excited.
We're both big Sanji heads,
Yeah.
which we'll get into. I guess before we get started, because we are going to be doing a little different this time. I'm trying to change up the formula a little bit, but this is kind of a longer arc. I mean, this is going to be the norm going forward, so I kind of want to get right into it. But before we do, I just wanted to mention that I was reading when One Piece first got animated, it was actually made into a OVA in 1998, and it was shown in the Jump Super Anime Tour 98, which was aired in theaters, which OVAs are usually like straight to video, but it was a short original animated film that has a totally different style, a different cast, everything. Like, I really am interested in checking that out. But that was apparently like their first test at animating it, was to do it like that.
So the OVA was like a pilot?
Yeah, I guess that's a way to look at it. And I guess what was really interesting to me is that we talked about how, you know, he made Romance Dawn, like those two pieces that were kind of like almost like setting things up, testing the waters before he made actually One Piece. And he did the same thing with the animation. It shows like how much work went into getting One Piece off the ground. And when you look at it now, when it's like the biggest series in the world, seeing that like he really carefully, you know, took his time to get this started, it just shows how important and how passionate he was about this even from the beginning. You know, it's like he could tell this was going to be his life's work.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So yeah, just wanted to mention that. I thought it was interesting, and I think like we should look that up, try to watch it at some point. But why don't we get right into the recap? So this arc, it starts out with the new full crew on the sea, hanging out on their new ship after Seer Village. But we pretty quickly go into a Zoro flashback while he's sleeping. And this was already kind of interesting because in the manga, the Zoro flashback happened like real early, like when his character was first introduced. But it was also kind of bare bones. Like I think I even mentioned in the episode that it was weird they didn't show any of that. And I was like, oh, they'll probably do it later. It makes a lot of sense that they saved it for this arc, which will make sense later. And it's also, the flashback is like way more in depth in this one. Like in the manga, it's actually pretty simple. There's a lot more detail added, which is a weird thing that they seem to do a lot in the early anime for One Piece, that they kind of take a lot of liberties and add the stuff, and it's really not bad. Like usually that's not great, you know, but they do a good job here. I mean, the idea behind the flashback is that he basically seemed to show up at this sword school when he was a child, just like this random wild kid who shows up and is just like, yeah, I'm going to beat everybody's ass in here. And so he challenges like the teacher, and he's like 6 years old or something.
Yeah,
he's like super young.
Yeah, he's depicted as very young, but like super feisty. And
yeah.
I think if I was going to imagine Zoro as a child, like this is it.
Yeah, well, it is funny because he seems like he's just cool as shit now. You know, like his older self is like very cool and laid back. And as a kid, he is like super wild. And it does seem like he kind of matured as he got older.
Yeah.
But it is funny because I think the other kids even mentioned that like, oh, he's so strong, he beats up adults, you know? So he definitely comes in here like, yeah, I'm going to beat the master of this dojo and take it over or whatever. And the master tells him like, well, why don't you fight my daughter, Kuina? And he's like, sure. And he's like, yeah, and you can use whatever swords you want. And this is already like an interesting detail that when he sees a stack of swords, he just grabs as many as he can, you know, which obviously plays into his character later. And even then, when he goes to fight her, they kind of point out like, oh, he used two swords, you know, one in each hand. And he just clearly, he doesn't know what he's doing. He just thinks like more swords equals better, basically. That becomes clear when he fights her, that he has no experience at all. He just has kind of brute strength. And Kuina, meanwhile, is like a very, very talented swords person, even though she's a girl, which becomes a big part of, you know, her story we're introduced to here. But she beats him very easily, which just frustrates Zoro, and he offers to join the school to receive like actual training, and that becomes the whole focus here, is like the back and forth where he keeps challenging Kuina, keeps trying to beat her, every single time gets defeated. And it's also interesting because it's like he's very cocky, you know, and he gets very frustrated that he keeps losing, but he keeps working at it like over and over and gets very frustrated because it's like he's hitting this brick wall, but he just refuses to give up. The big turning point is when I think he overhears the teacher talking to like his friend or something. I don't know if you remember.
I don't know if I remember completely.
Well, I think that what he overhears is that like her father is explaining, you know, how talented she is.
Oh, yes. I remember this.
Yeah, and how she's never going to be able to be a top swordsman because she's a woman, because apparently her dad is like red-pilled or something.
Yeah, it's very disappointing because you can see how talented she is, and he's just like, well, she's a girl, so...
Yeah, like shrugs his shoulders like, well, you know, she's weaker than men, so she's never going to do it. This winds up just making Zoro like furious because he's like, what are you talking about? Like, she keeps beating me over and over again, and he sees her as this like insurmountable obstacle. So hearing that, it just makes him more frustrated. But you also learn that because he keeps challenging her like this, it actually motivates her, even though it seems like she's been told her whole life, like, yeah, you're never going to make it, you know? It winds up motivating her to keep at it and just to stay ahead of him. You know what I mean? So it's this back and forth that even though they're kind of like pissed at each other, because I think she is mad at Zoro because it's like, you're a man and you're like, you can't even beat me, and I'm supposed to be weak. Like, what are you doing? And it's almost like this. It's like her seeing the promise that like she's being told, you know, that she's never going to make it. She sees this as being this obstacle. And so they go back and forth until eventually she challenges him with real swords. So they go and they fight with real swords, and she still beats him. And that becomes the big emotional moment, the big beat of this whole flashback, because Zoro's like reduced to tears at that point because he just feels like he can't do anything. And Kuina explains that like, you know, I don't know what you're frustrated about because I'm about to hit a wall that I can't get past. And he just, Zoro being, you know, woke as hell, is like, what are you talking about? Like, he just gets mad at her for that, almost like she's giving up at that point. And it feels like this big turning point for both of them. But then tragically, we find out she dies like off screen in some kind of accident or something. And I think it's extra tragic and winds up setting up Zoro's character because they had made a promise that, you know, Zoro and her were going to compete to be the best swordsman in the world. And with her passing away like this, it's like extra frustrating that he's not going to be able to compete with her. So he makes this promise that he is going to become the best swordsman in order to fulfill that promise. And I think he mentions that in previous arcs, this promise that he made. Mm-hmm. So he like can't lose. So this finally like fleshes that out and gives us, you know, his full character. And I think the last big detail is that when he makes that promise, he goes to her father and he asks for her sword as like a symbol that he can use to fulfill her promise. And that's one of the three swords that he uses like to this day. So I don't know, what were your like lasting thoughts from this whole flashback?
Well, I think Oda really shows like a very nuanced part of just being a girl in
Yeah.
a patriarchal society.
Where everyone's telling you like you're not going to be good enough.
Well, yeah, I mean, everything is, pretty much set up for men. I'm not going to get too into it, but I think it's a really beautiful story, and it just shows how far empathy and connection with other people can go. Like, it really, his whole experience with her really just like formed him completely.
Yeah.
And I think that him like dedicating his life to her and her dream and his dream combined, basically, I think is just really sweet.
Yeah, and you see how seriously he takes that oath going forward, especially plays a part in this arc, which we'll talk a lot more about that later.
Yeah, I think there's like an overwhelmingly amazing representation for like loyalty and friendship, and I love seeing how that gets weaved into the story.
Definitely. And so we come out of this knowing that Zoro is a woke king, like I think we already knew. But it helps to show, a big part of things so far is everyone on Luffy's crew seems to have these crazy ambitions. And now you really see why, like, when Zoro says he wants to be the best swordsman in the world, it's not just him, like, his pride or anything like that. It goes a lot deeper. And I think that makes his commitment feel much stronger. It's not as flimsy as it could be, But when we get back to the present, we see Luffy and Usopp are playing around with the cannons on the ship.
Yes.
I love these little moments where it shows, like, kind of life on the ship with them,
I love that too. And what's so great about those is it could be an episode of just slice of life on the ship, and I would watch the entire thing.
I think I remember reading, because we skip all the filler arcs. We might like wind up going back and doing that for like some bonus content or something, but I think I read there is a filler arc that's basically just like slice of life on the ship.
I love that. And we have to watch that.
Yeah, I've heard fans say that's like one of the only filler arcs that's like worth watching because it's just fun. So I'm interested in figuring out like where that fits in the timeline.
Yeah.
But it is a common thing that Luffy and Usopp especially are just like, these little delinquent kids that just get in the shit.
Around.
Yeah. Like their relationship is so great. But Luffy's playing with the cannon, can't hit anything. He's like aiming at this big rock. And then Usopp, who is the sharpshooter on the crew, is like, well, let me give it a shot. And yeah, he hits the rock first try. Which shows that even though he's kind of this silly, cowardly character, like he is skilled, when he puts his mind to it with stuff like this.
Am I right in thinking that Usopp is not only a sharpshooter but like an engineer?
I don't think he's like specifically an engineer. I think it's more that he's like very handy and like has a lot of ingenuity, so he kind of steps into that role. That's something we're definitely going to talk more about later because it becomes important.
Yeah. I think I'm very fascinated by his role in the crew because it seems very multifaceted.
Well, I think that seems to be by design, since like if he was useless and he's also all cowardly, it would be like, who is this annoying asshole?
Yes, of course.
But he definitely pulls his weight, Yeah, I think this is when we get some mystery swordsman showing up on the ship. He's like pissed off. He's like breaking everything, and everyone's like, "What? Who is this guy? Where did he come from?" And Luffy, of course, just comes out and is just like, "Stop!" and just like instantly puts him down. But Zoro recognizes this guy. I think this was this was Johnny, and apparently they were bounty hunters together. Like they would actually, I guess, go on bounty hunts together because they knew each other, seemed to have a history. And we also get introduced to Yosaku, who is Johnny's partner. And Yosaku is like deathly ill, like knocking on death's door. And everyone's like so worried. And Nami, as usual,
I love this.
She just comes out and is just like, you idiot. Like he's got scurvy. Like you guys haven't been eating right.
Which is so funny because you would think that's like, I mean, obviously by Nami's reaction, you'd think that's like common knowledge. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. So this, I'll quickly say this is something One Piece does a lot, which again, we'll talk about more. But I feel like a lot of these arcs, especially the ones that are like in between arcs, in between like the major ones, they usually present these certain ideas to like flesh out the world and the story that they're blended so seamlessly in you aren't really thinking about it. And like in this case with this arc, it's all about the importance of food when you're on the sea, you know, because you are completely cut off from everything. You're surrounded by water, but you can't drink any of it. You know what I mean? So, and even like, you know, there's plenty of fish that you can eat, but your body needs more than just fish. You need citrus and whatever, you know, to fight scurvy, which is kind of like a well-known thing. You need like limes and lemons to combat that, or
and
fresh
I think
fruit.
Oranges is usually what's depicted in most American
I guess
pirate movies.
Whatever you can get your hands on.
Yeah.
But it's the idea that this stuff, nutrition's important on the ocean. No, maybe this is like foreshadowing where this arc is going. But yeah, I think their reaction is to just like squeeze lime straight into his mouth, you know, like as if it's medicine, and that works. Like brings them back, and they're suddenly like, you know, dancing around, super happy, like thank you, like you saved our lives. They're silly characters, but even though they're like very minor, I like them. I think they add something. Like I don't know how you felt about them.
No, I liked it too. I think their character design is really cool too. Yeah. After this, I think the two of them mentioned the Baratie, as the arc is called. The Baratie is this like famous seafaring restaurant. It's basically like a ship that is also a restaurant that they know about, and they know it's in this area in the East Blue. So that becomes their next destination, so they can stock up on food. And since they're still getting their crew together and everything, like Luffy's very excited to be like, maybe we can find a cook on here, you know? So that turns in their next destination. As they show up to the Baratie, this is when we get introduced to another character named Full Body, who's a naval officer. I don't know if you remember this. Like the Navy kind of shows up at the same time, and they're like, "Oh shit!" Mm-hmm. And it's especially funny because Yasaku and Johnny, who are bounty hunters who like work with the Navy, they're on a pirate ship, so they're trying to be like, "Oh shit!" and like covering their faces, you know. But Full Body, you know, as a lot of the Navy seems to be depicted, they kind of look at them as like, what are you doing here? You're just some filthy pirates. So he's just immediately like, yeah, just sink them, you know? So they shoot at them, and Luffy's reaction to that is to like, I think in the manga, I think he like inflates himself and it bounces off. I think in the anime it was like a little more complicated. Like he slingshots his body or something. Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
I don't know. I haven't read the manga, but...
It's not important. What matters is, though, he deflects the cannonball to protect the ship, but being Luffy, he deflects it straight into the Baratie, and it, like, makes a hole in it. So not the best, you know, entrance for them.
No, but very Luffy-coded.
Definitely. But yeah, so then we get our first introduction to the Baratie because Luffy gets dragged in front of the captain, Zeph, because the cannonball went straight in his bedroom and put a hole in the wall. And that turns into these negotiations where he's, you know, Luffy and them, they don't have any money, or at least if they do, Nami controls it, and there's no way she's giving that up. So they make this decision. They're like, all right, you can stay here and you can work it off for 2 years. Which, of course, Luffy is just like, it's funny because Luffy, he is such a good character. He's more than willing to work it off. He's like, yes, please. He's like begging for forgiveness and everything. But when he says 2 years, he's like, oh, I can't do that. I can't, like, I got stuff I'm doing right now. I can't stay here for 2 years.
Yeah, I'm trying to be king of the pirates. I don't have time to be here for 2 years.
And I think he tries to negotiate like 1 week. He's like, no, like what? But after that little scene, this is when we get our big introduction to the man himself, Sanji. Which, before we get into the scene, we should talk about this really quick because, yeah, Sanji, we're both big fans, both big Sanji heads over here.
Yes, I love Sanji.
But what's funny, I remember when we were first watching this, like, a big part of his character. You know,
Yeah, me too.
He's like very, he's the pervy character.
Yeah.
He's the one. Go ahead.
I was just immediately turned off by this character.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, this is so annoying.
It's kind of like an anime trope, but whenever he sees a pretty girl, his like nose starts bleeding and he's like got the hearts in the eye. It's like straight up like Looney Tunes level.
I know, and I remember, I thought you were going to bring this up. Like, I was just so angry at this character. I'm like, stop oogling at women all the time. Give them a break.
Well, yeah, it was funny because I can remember, when you're being introduced, it's kind of like, okay, you're figuring the guy out. And then as soon as he starts doing that, you were just kind of like, okay, is that this guy? Like, okay. And after that, every time it happened, you were like, really? Is that all this guy is, But, you get a good look at his character as the story goes on and see that there's definitely more to him than that.
I think this is the fastest I've ever turned on not liking a character.
Yeah.
Was with Sanji. And again, Oda he knows what he's doing. Like, he just knows how to tell a story.
Well, I was going to say, rewatching it especially, like, I think there's a lot going on, like a lot of little character moments that you can kind of miss maybe the first time, that the second time through you can really pick up. Like, even in this arc, a lot of work is done to show that there's a lot more going on with this character. So there's a lot to appreciate. Yeah,
I really, really enjoyed watching this again, especially just with this fresh perspective of, oh, I love this character, and now I can take in this story with me knowing that I love him. Yeah, so. Exactly. But his introduction, he comes out, cool as shit, cigarette in his mouth, which I did want to point out real quick that we talked about the 4Kids edit before. Yeah. So apparently Sanji, he had a Brooklyn accent in the 4Kids version, and the cigarette got edited into a lollipop. Oh, okay. Which is like, it feels like a lot of effort to get rid of the cigarette. Why the Brooklyn accent? I don't know. I need to see this, though. It's definitely something you can imagine these studio people who don't care about anime sitting down and being like, yeah, sure, Brooklyn accent. He's from New York, whatever. But it's a great scene because he comes out looking cool as hell with the cigarette and everything. He's serving full body, and there's like a funny scene where... He is serving full body. Yeah. So full body, this Navy officer who... He's one of those throwaway characters that like... His defining thing is he has like these big brass knuckles or something on his hands. But there's like a whole funny scene where I guess he had set it up where he would get delivered this certain kind of wine, and he would fake like he was a wine connoisseur and like identifies it. But Sanji just doesn't care about that. He explains he's not a waiter, he's a sous chef, but all the waiters like ran away a few days ago or something, which is a little setup for like what's going on at Baratie, what kind of ship this actually is. But yeah, he tries to say like, oh, this is clearly this kind of wine, and Sanji's just like, no, you're wrong, and just like walks away, and the guy's like devastated by this. This scene reminds me of like what an influencer must be like when they go into a restaurant. Yeah, we're like, I'll give you exposure in exchange for this meal. Yeah. But then full body, he's like so devastated by this. He tries to turn the tables by putting like a bug in his soup and calls him back over as though trying to call out like how filthy the restaurant is and their food's terrible and whatever. And that just turns into Sanji beating the shit out of him. Because I think he throws the soup on the floor or something. And this is our first hint at like Sanji does not tolerate wasting food. As soon as he does this, Sanji just beats the living shit out of him and gets in trouble for it, which also sets up the Sanji a bit of a tough character. He's not just a cook. Yeah, I will say like his backstory surprised me. Like, I was not expecting this for this character. Oh yeah, we'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, Sanji, he gets in trouble for this, but they actually get interrupted because the Navy pops up and they reveal that this pirate named Krieg, his underling that they had captured, escaped. And so we get introduced to these pirates that are known as like the strongest in the East Blue. So Luffy's been kind of working his way up
to this point seems logical that this is where we're at now, that this pirate named Krieg, he's the strongest pirate in the East Blue. There's like a whole story about how they apparently went to the Grand Line recently, but they returned and were like starving, and their ships were destroyed and everything. And it's another one of those foreboding things about the Grand Line and the dangers that are over there.
The whole crew is like starving, right? And like hollowed faced and
yeah, we get introduced to them in a bit, because for now all we get is Geen. I think they pronounce it Geen, I want to say, because I remember thinking it was like a strange pronunciation, but Geen shows up. He's starving. He seems to be like some kind of officer in Krieg's crew, but when he shows up, he's demanding food because he's starving. And the Baratie cooks are just like, well, you clearly don't have any money, so they immediately toss him out. And this leads into the first of many like very important scenes with Sanji, where Sanji finds him like on the back of the ship and brings him food and feeds him, even though he doesn't have any money. Sanji, he reveals that, you know, he sees his job as being feeding people who are hungry, period, no matter what. You know, and there's this implication there's more going on there, which we will get to. But clearly, like, he has this level of compassion when it comes to food. And Luffy winds up actually seeing all this, and he immediately is kind of taking notes. Because this is something, again, we see a lot where when Luffy's recruiting people, he definitely sees something in these characters that maybe other people aren't paying attention to. And with Sanji and his compassion, you know, Luffy sees something there that resonates with him.
Yeah, Luffy is very good at judging character.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Luffy immediately like comes up to him and is just like, hey, join my crew. Like, you know, because he's always very direct with this stuff. And Sanji's just like, I don't know who you are. like I'm not about to leave and join you. And that becomes a theme in this, is Luffy just every now and then being like, so you're joining me, right? You know, like just pestering the hell out of him. And there's like a whole back and forth with them.
Yeah, I love the energy of how Luffy asked to be somebody's friend.
But yeah, it's important to point out that I think part of this is Sanji, he seems to have some kind of understanding of like what it means to really be hungry. And Zeph does too, because I think Zeph sees this happening as well and doesn't like intervene or anything. So there's already this like setup that there's something going on there with the two of them and their history, you know. So Sanji feeds him, he gives him a boat, sends him off, and there is also like that part where Luffy talks to Geen and explains that they are also setting up to go to the Grand Line, and Geen like immediately tries to dissuade him and say like, you do not understand the danger that you're getting yourself into. And it just serves as like more setup to the Grand Line being this huge goal that is very foreboding, very dangerous, you know, continues to build up that kind of anticipation, expectation of what's to come. But I think this part of the episode that kind of gets rounded out with a couple things that I wanted to point out. One was Luffy, he gets put to work, you know, like now he's basically like their cabin boy doing the dirty jobs. And what was funny about this, it makes it clear that like we see Luffy as this like really strong, really important character, you know, but whenever he's put into any other setting, he's just so completely useless. Like it made me think like if he didn't become a pirate, he would be worthless. Like he wouldn't be able to do anything, because he is kind of just like hanging out in the kitchen, just like watching. And they're like, why are you just standing there? Like, go wash some dishes. He's like, okay. And just starts breaking all the dishes while he's washing them. He's like completely useless. And then, I think another really funny scene is when he goes to, they're like, okay, well, why don't you go serve some people or whatever? So he goes out there, and you see the rest of the Straw Hats are just chilling at a table. Like
he's like jealous.
Yeah, it becomes this whole funny scene where they're just like hanging out, and they're just like, oh, what are you doing, Luffy? Like, bring us some food or whatever. And he's like, what the hell, man? I can't eat with you guys. You know, like I gotta work.
It shows like how strong their friendship is already. Like they're just joking with each other and like taking jabs, and it's funny.
Their dynamic is great. And yeah, there's like that part where Luffy tries to put like a booger in Zoro's water. It's just so funny. And the other characters are like,
it's like so
cracking
obvious.
up.
They're like,
Yeah, but then like Nami and Usopp are like cracking up
Yeah.
and like covering their mouths. It's so funny.
Yeah.
And then Zoro, of course, when he's getting ready to drink, he sees it and starts trying to shove it in Luffy's mouth, you know?
yes.
It's so funny.
It's so funny.
But that's also when Sanji shows up and gets his first glimpse at Nami.
Oh my god! And this,
Yeah.
I couldn't have rolled my eyes harder because I'm
Yeah.
like, what is going on with this character? Like, leave Nami alone.
Yeah, it's funny. He's like, he just immediately turns into a simp and is like ready to do anything for her. And she immediately picks up on it and
Oh,
is just
yeah.
like, okay, so I can eat for free, right? You know, like immediately takes advantage.
As she should.
Yeah, it's very funny.
Yes, it's extremely funny. And watching it around the second time just made it even funnier. Like,
Yeah.
truly, for me at least.
Yeah, I think it's after this that Zeph clearly has been like watching Sanji and like all his interactions with Luffy and them, and you can tell like Zeph and Sanji they're kind of like fighting all the time, but at the same time you can see that Zeph, he knows that Sanji has like these bigger dreams and aspirations, and again we haven't gotten like the full breadth of their story yet, but I think they have like a fight here where Zeph is trying to tell Sanji like to leave. He's like, we don't need you here. Go with them. But he tells him like he's trying to kick him out and tells him to go with the Straw Hats and them. And it's because he can already see there's like a dynamic there, and he sees maybe this is Sanji's opportunity to leave and like pursue his own ambitions. You know.
I will say, just to slide in, that Zeph's character design is so great because he literally looks like the saltiest pirate ever.
Oh, yeah.
Like, if you were standing next to him, he would just smell of like sweat and salt.
I also think that we should measure the value of cooks by the height of their hats.
Oh my gosh.
Because
Yes, I
his
love
hat
this.
is like reaches the ceiling. It doesn't make any sense, but
No, but it's so cool.
it just when you see that, you know, like he's a serious ass
He's a
chef.
really good chef. Look how tall his hat
Holy
is.
shit! Yeah. But this, I think, after this argument is when the Krieg pirates finally show up. They were led there by Geen because Geen, you know, he was allowed to escape after eating. And he brings them back because he wants to feed his whole crew and look out for them. And this is how you see that when they show up, they have this massive fleet, but the ships are like half destroyed, including their flagship, which is like this gigantic ship that like towers over the Baratie. Which, by the way, did you want to like say something about the design of the Baratie ship?
Oh my gosh. Yes. Okay.
Kind of
So
skipped over that.
that's fine. It's so beautiful, and what it just reminds me of is like the Studio Ghibli bathhouse, but like
Oh, totally.
as a ship, and like the fact that it is a fish too. I love it. It's just such a cool design. The colors are so cool, and especially since it has like little fins on the side and stuff, and I'm sure we'll get into all that
Yeah, it's
later.
very distinctive.
But it's such a cool design, and I love it so much.
Well, it's funny you mentioned it is like a very Studio Ghibli type of design.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you say that, it totally looks that way. Like the colors and the fish head and everything.
Yeah, just the sheer like structure of it and how big it is. It's just so cool.
Yeah. But this, as I was saying, yeah, Krieg and them, they show up and they're all starving and like just on the ropes. And Krieg basically tells them that they have a ton of money but no food, which is another thing that'll come up here. But he promises that he'll leave them alone if they feed him, and obviously he can pay for it. But the other pirates on the Baratie, or the cooks, I mean, on the Baratie, they like refuse because they know he already has this reputation for being like very treacherous, and they're saying like if we feed them, they're just going to turn on us and attack us. And they're ready to kick him out. But of course, Sanji and Zeph, because of whatever they went through, they refuse to just allow them to stay hungry. So they bring out all the food against the cries of the other crewmates.
I think what's nice about this scene is that both both parties have very good reasons for their decision. It's not like in this particular circumstance, it's not like, well, they don't have money, so I don't want to. It's like they're actually scared of, give someone a bone and, maybe they're going to turn on you or something, and it's scary.
Well, they reveal that I guess they have a reputation for doing things like flying a Navy flag and then getting close to civilians and attacking them. Like, that's his thing. Like,
right.
Which is interesting because, last arc we had Kuro, which his whole thing was he's all about making plans. He's called Kuro of the Thousand Plans. And he really just cares about himself and making sure that, he is taken care of and safe and enriched by what they're doing.
Yeah, and Kuro, obviously just has 1,000 shitty plans.
Yeah.
Not very good plans.
But Krieg, then, his thing is that he's treacherous and will kind of do whatever it takes to win. Yeah, so they wind up feeding them anyways, and as soon as Krieg gets enough food, and it's like, food is always treated as like this power-up, because as soon as he eats it, he just immediately is back to his full strength and just immediately turns on them and attacks them.
I wish that's how food actually worked.
Well, yeah. But it is like, yeah, of course, this is his character. He betrays them instantly and immediately says, like, his plan is he's going to take over the Baratie and he's going to take that to the Grand Line, because he seems to be really hung up on being defeated out there. And he's like desperate to go back and to, conquer it. He sees this as being his opportunity. He takes the Baratie out there. He can lure people in with it and then attack them, because that's what he does. But yeah, and the other big reveal here for Krieg is that one of the Baratie cooks, he winds up pulling out like this cannon to shoot at him to try and get him off the ship. And when he gets hit by the cannon, it's like no effect at all. And there's the reveal that he's wearing this full suit of this, they call it Woots steel armor that's like indestructible, and so he doesn't get hurt at all.
It's like vibranium.
Yeah. Adamantium, whatever you want to call it. Like Woots is, I guess, their version of it in the One Piece world. But Krieg also, he recognizes Zeph, and this is when we get our first little bit of backstory on him, because he calls him Redfoot Zeph and says, like, apparently he was this known pirate who was like very malicious, and he was called Redfoot Zeph because he had these like nasty kicking techniques that were really dangerous. But now he sees that Zeph has 2 peg legs instead. Or no, he just has the one peg leg.
One. Yeah.
Which I guess makes more sense. But he has 1 peg leg now, so he thinks like, well, I guess there goes Redfoot Zeph, like that was your whole strength. And it was taken away. And this is also when Zeph mentions that, like, his whole mentality is that as a cook, you use your hands for cooking and your feet for fighting. So that's why, like, you can see this, that he passed this on to Sanji, because Sanji's whole thing seems to be he fights by kicking. He never uses his hands because you don't want to sully your hands fighting when you need that for cooking.
Yes, and I love this concept because it works so well with a chef character that fights. Like, it just makes sense. Yeah,
and it's worth pointing out that when he recognizes Redfoot Zeph, like, his first thing is he demands that he hands over his logbook, because he knows that Zeph spent all this time on the Grand Line, and he thinks, like, well, if I can look at your logbook, I can maybe get some insight that's going to help me to succeed. Because again, he's like just so desperate by any means necessary to conquer the Grand Line. But this also leads to, he reveals that I guess he aspires to be king of the pirates like Luffy does. And Luffy at this point, who's just like cabin boy wearing a little apron, he hears him say this and he's like, like, I can't let that slide. So he immediately steps up. He's like, no. Like, I'm going to be the king of the pirates. So he's already challenging him. But you can imagine from Krieg's point of view, he just looks at him like, what? Like, who are you? And he just like completely ignores Luffy at this point. But yeah, so he ignores him because Luffy has not made a name for himself at all at this point. Nobody knows who he is. But Krieg, he winds up also revealing that, they were on the Grand Line like very briefly. I can't remember what the timeline was, but he says that, his entire 50-ship fleet was taken out by one man known as Hawkeye Dracul Mihawk, which is a pretty awesome name. But he describes him as a hawk-eyed man who took out the whole fleet by himself with his sword, and Zoro is the one who kind of perks up when he hears about this, because there's the reveal that this hawk-eyed man is regarded as the greatest swordsman in the world, a very dangerous figure. And this takes us back to Zoro and his promise from the flashback that he wants to be the best swordsman in the world. He feels like that's a promise he made to Kuina, and he thinks the only way that he can achieve that is if he defeats the current greatest swordsman in the world. And so, of course, it's at this moment that as Krieg's pirates are getting ready to attack the Baratie, this one man shows up in his little boat, which I guess we should talk about this character real quick, because I think it's very cool.
So fucking cool.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like he should have, like, metal music playing while he's, like,
definitely
pulling up, because he's just such a cool character.
Yeah, he almost looks like this, like, vampire figure,
Yeah.
He's like this Spanish vampire or something.
It's so cool looking. Like, I love it.
He's got the drip.
Yeah, definitely.
He's got the big hat, the giant sword.
He is definitely, like, at this point, for me, the drippiest pirate on the sea.
And he's like in this tiny little boat with like candles on it or something.
Yes, it's
like,
so cool. Yeah. It looks like he should have like a fog machine and like metal music and everything and like cool ass lights.
But he shows up and he winds up just completely destroying what's left of Krieg's ships like instantly. And it's funny because one of the things I did want to point out here is that after all this talk, where they're talking about how scary and foreboding the Grand Line is and everything, it's like you see Straw Hats and like Luffy is just pumped. Like he hears this, he's just more excited. And Zoro, when he hears all about Mihawk, is just getting all fired up too, because he's like, he can't wait. He's like, yes, like when can we leave?
I love it so much because Luffy, like, his ambition is matched by everyone on the crew. Like, everyone has the same level of ambition for whatever paths they're taking in their life. And I love that Zoro's like, oh, I'm going to beat this guy. Like, I got to beat this guy. It's
very important. But before we get to the next part of the story, there is this little moment where it's revealed that Nami, she had been staring at this one wanted poster because to Johnny and Yosaku, since they're bounty hunters, they were carrying all these bounty posters with them. And Nami, kind of out of the corner of her eye, sees one of them, and it kind of sparks something. And you notice she keeps staring at it, but it's very mysterious. And there's a moment where she's on the ship with the two of them, and she kind of tricks them. And I think it's another thing where she's using her womanhood. She's like pretending to change or something.
This part was so funny. I just love...
She knows what she's doing.
Oh my God, she knows what she's doing, and it's so funny.
Yeah, she uses this to steal the ship, all their treasure, and everything. And she mentions to them that, like, hey, I'm a thief who steals from pirates. Like, what do you expect? And she also tells them that, like, she's like, oh, well, I never formally joined, but I had fun, And so she leaves like that, which seems like very treacherous, that she betrayed them.
Yeah, at first I was really upset at her for this. Yeah. Like, I thought it was funny her tricking them, but, like, at first I was like, this
it does feel
sucks.
Kind of messed up.
Because I really already loved Nami, and then I was like, what the heck? She's just leaving,
But there is, like, you can sense that... she seems sad about it. Like, she doesn't seem like, yes, I tricked them. Like, there is this, like, melancholy, and there's that wanted poster, like, what did you think of that? Did you have any idea?
I had no idea. I mean, I didn't know if she knew what was going on, or I mean, like, obviously she knows, she recognizes it, but like, I had no idea what the story was. Again, watching this over again was a lot better than the first time. Yeah, not that I didn't like it the first time, because it was something that built up as the story went through, but the nuance that is applied is like crazy.
I think that's the trouble with getting into something like this that's this big for the first time, is it could be tough to get into like the flow of things and understand like the nuance, the storytelling style. So I think it's all very effective. It's just you have to kind of get into that groove.
Yeah.
And I think it takes a little time to fit into that.
Yeah, I think coming in completely fresh at first, it's definitely like you need to give the story room to breathe.
Yeah, for sure. But there is the interesting detail where once Luffy hears about this, instead of being like angry or anything, he's just like, all right, we got to go get her. Because he's just like, yeah, she's the navigator.
And it's just, I love Luffy's character so much. Like the fact that he was like, he just knew in his head, well, she must have a reason, but we need to go get her. Like it was like not a split second of hesitation of judging her as a person. He just knew if she was doing something, all right, we'll go get her and see what's going on. Well,
it's clear he cares like very deeply for his crew. And the last arc, he made it clear that like he sees all his crewmates as his friends, you know, and so he just will not accept anyone else as his navigator. So that's that. But the setup here is now we have a lot of stuff going on. So Luffy, he winds up sending everybody out after Nami, but he says he has to stay behind because he still has to repay his debt to the Baratie, which, hey, again, like, that's Luffy for you.
I know,
he's a good dude.
Just priorities.
Yeah. And then Zoro, who's getting ready to leave too, when he sees Mihawk, he's like, well, I can't go because this is my opportunity. I've been looking for this guy, so this is my chance to challenge him. And that's the segue into their confrontation, which this is, I think in this arc we get a lot of like certain scenes that are like these defining moments in the series. And it's funny because when I was first reading this arc, you know, we're still kind of in that setup phase, and I was kind of blasting through because at this point, if I'm being very blunt, I think a lot of the settings are like not exceptional. Like as cool as Baratie is, the fact this whole arc takes place here is like just, it's not like super exciting like as far as the setting goes, and the villains are kind of like these C tier, you know, goofy guys. So there's a lot of like little stuff that I kind of missed the first time as a result of that, but there are some like major moments in here that set things up for the whole series. And this confrontation between Zoro and Mihawk is like definitely a big one. Because he immediately challenges him to a duel, seeing this as his way of fulfilling his promise to Kuina.
Yeah, and now that we're here, I think the fact that they left his backstory for here, like you were setting up, is perfect. Like it really meshed together really well. Just to show like how important this moment is to Zoro.
It makes sure that that's all fresh on your mind because thematically this all fits together very well. But it is interesting because when they go to duel, you know, Mihawk at first is just like, I don't, like, who are you? Like, he just doesn't care at all. And he just sees this as a way of showing Zoro, like, how big the world is. And I think he refers to him as being, like, a frog in a small pond or something, which is another thing that's, like, very foreboding, you know, as far as setting up where the story's going. And, yeah, in this duel, you know, Zoro pulls out his 3 swords, and Mihawk pulls out, like, this tiny little dagger. Like, won't even draw his actual sword, and is like, let me just show you how big the world is. And it's a really cool fight because, yeah, Zoro, we've seen at this point, like, he's very strong, he's very skilled with the 3 swords, but Mihawk is like this whole other level. Like, this tiny little dagger, he just instantly blocks his attacks, and, like, Zoro just can't gain any ground at all. And when he goes to use one of his big attacks, I think it's Tiger Trap at first, Mihawk stabs him straight in the chest and, like, stops his attack. And this is also, it's a big moment because when he stabs him, I think Mihawk makes a point where he's like, you're just going to let me stab you like this? And Zoro is just like, I cannot back down. Like, I'd rather die, you know? So he just takes it and refuses to step back an inch, you know?
Yeah, I think how relentless, like, Zoro is in this fight is really admirable. It just shows this immense amount of loyalty to Kuina, and the fact that Hawkeye is so strong, but also not willing to just go brute strength on Zoro is interesting. I think to see this level of respect between swordsmen is really neat.
Well, I think
it's a neat exchange.
I think at first he's just kind of like, let me show you how big the world is, like you said. But yeah, after this moment when he hears Zoro say, like, I'd rather, die than face defeat, and he sees how serious he is, he decides to show him the respect of drawing his actual sword. And so you get this last, attack from both of them where Zoro pulls out this crazy attack we haven't seen yet called 3,000 Worlds and goes into it. And of course, Mihawk just like one slash destroys two of his swords and slashes them straight across the chest, which even that's a moment where I think when Zoro sees it coming, he kind of just opens his arms and just takes it. And that's another thing where he says that like scars on the back are like a swordsman's shame. So he just refuses to turn his back, refuses to run away, and just takes it. But he also reveals that, after hearing all this and experiencing this fight with Zoro, he's not going to let him just throw his life away because he sees that he has all this potential. So he mentions to Luffy that, the wound isn't fatal, that he'll be okay. Because Luffy gets, like, pissed. He's like, I can't believe he did this to my dude,
I remember first watching this, and I was so upset and sad for Zoro.
Yeah, it's very sad.
Yeah, but again, the story just beautifully wraps up this whole way of being a swordsman and, like, understanding the level of respect between them and stuff, and it's interesting.
Yeah, and Zoro's commitment to
this.
But there is a funny exchange where Luffy explains to him that he's trying to be king of the pirates, and Hawkeye is like, oh, well, you have a much harder path than he does even, and Luffy's just very defiant, and he's just kind of like, well, how would I know if I haven't done it yet? Like just throws it right back at him.
So sassy.
Yeah. But it does lead to like this very heartfelt moment where, when it's revealed that Zoro's still alive, he has like tears streaming down his face, and he yells out to Luffy that he will never lose again after that, and
it's
Luffy's
so
just immediately like, yes, like Luffy just gets it, But it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it shows how strong their spirits and their convictions are and everything, and how they have this like serious brotherhood, which I think the relationship between Luffy and Zoro, we'll talk a lot more about this as the series goes on. I love their relationship.
I love their relationship too. Like, they are like ideal best friends, and just the way they uphold each other's dreams and respect each other so immensely.
Yeah, and like the fact they act like these manly ass men, but so they're not like affectionate to one another, but you can tell like they will die for each other.
Oh yeah,
they have a great relationship. But yeah, so we get into the big action of this arc when Luffy, after witnessing all this and getting, appropriately fired up, he tells Zeph that like, he's basically like, well, if I can defeat Krieg, how about you let me off the hook, on this whole thing? And Zeph's kind of like, sure, kid, like whatever you say. But this sets up the rest of the arc, which is basically where we get into the action, where a lot starts happening. So let's get ready for battle. So even though Zeph is kind of, he doesn't really understand what's going on with Luffy. He hears he wants to be king of the pirates. He doesn't know anything about him. You can tell, like, and I think this is a big thing in One Piece, is the characters who are truly strong and like really know their stuff. He looks at Luffy and he recognizes like the ambition that he has, and he sees the relationship with his crew, and so he's able to pick up on like there is something going on here, whereas someone like Krieg is just like, thinks of Luffy as someone who's like so far beneath him and doesn't care.
Yeah.
It's the people like Zeph who can like look right at his core and see like, okay, there's something here. And I think he even tells Sanji, he's like, keep an eye on Luffy, like watch how he fights, because he knows like there's something going on there.
Yeah, it's real, recognize real, for sure.
That's a good way to sum it up. Yeah. And so as they get ready to fight, they deploy the fins on the Baratie, which is like this little deck.
This.
Yeah,
Oh, I
cool
love it
detail.
so much.
But they deploy the fins on the side because it gives them like a deck where they can fight on to get this wrapped up. And the other cool thing here is when the pirates first start, jumping up on the fins to attack. This is when Luffy runs out there and just like wipes them all out like immediately because of course that's what he does.
Yeah.
But this is the reveal that he has devil fruit powers, which since we aren't on the Grand Line yet where that's more normal, Krieg and his crew when they see this are like, shocked by it and they're like, okay, like I guess he's one of those devil fruit weirdos, Still not impressed or scared or anything, but it's still interesting. And the first thing that happens is, there are two of the cooks. What's it like? It's carne. Is that, how do you say that?
Like carne asada?
Yeah, because I think it's supposed to be like food related. So it's like carne and something else. So there's two of the cooks. They deploy the mackerel head one, like the fish head at the front.
Yeah,
it's like a little
that was
boat.
Also very cool.
Yeah, but it launches out and starts shooting cannons at all the pirates and like wiping them out. But Krieg is able to stop it with like one hand because we're still getting set up that Krieg is like not a force to be reckoned with, And also when the pirates, when they start boarding the ship and fighting with the cooks, it's interesting because we get at some point this little flashback where we can see that when Zeph and Sanji were first setting up the Baratie, they were recruiting like cooks who basically were like kicked out everywhere else for fighting and being like roughnecks and stuff. But they take them in and accept them because they know if we're going to be at sea, we need to not only be able to cook, we need to be able to fight off pirates and be like self-sustaining. So they're no joke, but when the Krieg's pirates jump on and start fighting, they get pushed back very quickly. And it's that reminder that these pirates are, even though they're cannon fodder, they're the strongest pirates in the East Blue. So they're not really something you can just ignore like that,
Am I correct in thinking that this is like an example of prison reform, like the idea of not punishing people for, their past, but taking them in and nurturing them and showing them how, to work as a team. I don't know. That's what came to my mind.
No, it makes sense. I think, it's also just that Zeph was a pirate himself at one point, so he doesn't just look at pirates and troublemakers as instantly bad people. He has that more depth of compassion, But yeah, so then it's Patty and Carne. What is it? Carne asada?
I want to say carne because I'm thinking carne asada.
Listen, we're going to say it once and never again since I don't know if it's correct or not. But they're like the two kind of named members of the fighting cooks. They come back and they're like the tough ones. So they're able to push them back until one of the chief pirates and Krieg's crew shows up, known as Pearl, who is able to push them back. We have to talk about Pearl for a second. We have to.
Yeah, this character design is so silly.
What in the world?
It's just, I was like, I think I didn't even know what to say or think when I first saw this character. I'm like, what is going on? It's so silly.
He is such a dumb character design. Listen, Oda has like this style, and a lot of the like B and C tier characters are kind of silly like this. But early on especially, it just feels so funny. Because it's just like, okay, it's a pirate who is themed around pearls, I guess. It's like an ocean thing. So he has like a pearl hat and like this weird big armor with like shields with pearls in them. He's so silly.
It's so silly. It's such a fun way of like taking on such an absurd concept.
Yeah. But I think he's known as like the invincible shield or something. So he's like indestructible with all these shields. But this is when Luffy tries to run over in this opportunity, to attack Krieg. But Krieg, since he's a dirty fighter, he just immediately like sends out all these bombs or something to try and knock Luffy into the water. Like he still sees Luffy as like beneath him. So he's like, I'm not going to fight you. Like, just get out of my way. But this leads to Luffy getting like knocked on the Pearl's head, which makes his nose bleed, and that makes him like freak out. Which I think everyone around is like, oh no, like Pearl, please calm down. But the idea is since this scene is being like invincible, he can't take looking at his own blood, so he sees it as like he's in danger. So he starts freaking out and he creates like all this fire. The fire pearl? I don't know, man. Like, what am I doing? I'm trying to explain this. So ridiculous. But he tries to like light the ship on fire, and Zeph shows he's still got some of that Riz left, and he like kicks the air, and like the air puts out the fire. You know, he's still got something going on.
Yeah, Pearl. Only in anime can you see a character like this.
Yeah. But yeah, and this is also when Krieg, he tries to intervene with this, because this is another, you know, Luffy's all about having faith in his crew to do the one-on-one fights. Krieg does not agree with that. He's like, whatever it takes to win. So he tries to intervene, and Luffy's just like, hell no. So he like repels back this spiked ball that he like launches over. And this again leads to Pearl getting injured by like a mast falling on his head or something. He's like just collateral damage. This is when Krieg is like finally ready to fight. So at this moment, it's revealed that, you know, since Krieg is now getting ready to fight, Geen, who's like the ultimate Krieg simp, is like scared for the crew. He's like actually trying to stand up and like defend the Baratie because he thinks that like they don't stand a chance against Krieg. So he takes Zeph hostage to try and like end things. But Sanji like shows he has, even though he bickers a lot with Zeph, there's like this deep loyalty there because he offers to take Zeph's place. And when Pearl comes up and starts like ambushing him and attacking Sanji like refuses to fight back. He just takes all the damage because he doesn't want to put Zeph in danger, you know.
Yeah, Zeph and Sanji's relationship is very heartwarming when you get down to it.
Well, and that leads us into, finally we get the big flashback of this arc, which explains their history and how they got here. But basically what's revealed is when Sanji was a child, he was working in a ship's kitchen, and he had this dream to find the all blue, which it's set up as like, you know, we already explained there's the east and west blue and the north and south, and each of them has different like fish, different ecologies, you know. But the all blue is this like mythical ocean that I think they say is supposed to be on the Grand Line somewhere, that contains fish from all four oceans. So it's like a cook's dream, you know, to go there. And the other cooks, they all kind of laugh at him. They think like that's not real. It doesn't exist, you know. But Sanji like refuses to give up on that dream. There's also a small detail where the cooks that work in this kitchen are like eating the leftover food, and Sanji's like, what are you doing? Like, that's gross. Like, just throw that away. You know, it's like very different attitude than he has in the present. But it's during this when Zeph, who at this point is still Redfoot Zeph, the pirate, he shows up and like ransacks the ship and stealing everything and killing the crew. And Sanji, which this is another funny like One Piece thing, because Sanji like stands up to him and refuses to lay down because he's got his dream is all blue. And Zeph just like kicks the shit out of him. Like, this show doesn't care about like if they're kids.
Yeah.
It's like, get out of like, who cares? Get out of my way. You know, like there's no sympathy for children. But there is this thing where when Sanji reveals that dream about the all blue, you see Zeph kind of take note. Like it moves him a little bit. Like, it's very subtle. But it's followed by like, before the pirates can pull out, this big storm hits. Everyone gets like washed overboard, including Sanji. And Zeph, instantly, he jumps in after Sanji to save him. And in the process, he gets like a chain wrapped around his leg and has to sever it in order to free himself and save Sanji. Which I just want to point out, in the anime, they replayed that scene so many times. Did this stand out to you at all?
You know what? You're right. They did. And it's such
Holy
a traumatizing scene. It's so sad.
It's so fun. It's like they really want to remind you, like, remember this happened.
Yeah.
Remember, this is how he lost his leg. Like, it just so many times. But anyway, yeah, what winds up happening is they wash up on this deserted, like, rock. And it's shown that it's kind of like they're high enough, they can't get any fish out of the water. If they try to jump down, they won't be able to get back up because of the way it's shaped. So they're, like, truly isolated and trapped out here. And Zeph has this, like, big bag of food, and he separates out some rations for Sanji and says, like, look, you sit on the other side of the rock. I'm going to sit over here. We're going to look for boats. Just don't come over here. Like, stay over there. And, you know, they're still, like, fighting with each other. He's like, good, I don't want to see you anyway, you know. But it turns into this, like, pretty harrowing scene where over, like, a long stretch of time, Sanji's trying to stretch out his rations and stay alive as he's, like, withering up and getting like really starved. Yeah. So you get a glimpse at like why he values food the way he does. It's because he knows what it's like to be like really truly hungry, and it's why when people come to him that are hungry, he can't just let them be, because he knows exactly what that's like. That's why he will feed anybody.
Yeah.
But there is a big moment after they've been there for a really long time and he runs out of food. He goes over to see Zeph, because Zeph had kept this like massive bag of food for himself and said like, look, I'm way bigger than you. I need more food, you know. But when he goes over there, he sees the bag is still huge. And when he opens it, it's because it's full of treasure. Like he basically gave all of the food to Sanji, kept the treasure. It's another reminder that like on the sea, doesn't matter how much money you got, how much treasure. Like, if you don't have food, then it's all meaningless, you know? It shows, like, how people value these different things that maybe aren't so important, you know? But it's a big moment. It's another one of the, like, major One Piece moments when he sees that Zeph is, like, withering away and is missing a leg. I did want to point out that this is another big change from the manga, because in the manga, what gets revealed is he doesn't get his leg trapped or anything. He's got the two legs when he gets to the island, but the whole thing, a little stormy.
What a great time for thunder.
But the whole thing is that when he's starving and has no food, he cuts off his own leg and eats it.
Oh my God,
survive.
I thought you were going to say that, and that is just insane.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That is insane.
And that's one of the things Jesus.
Oh my gosh.
I think I mentioned before that, so in the manga, there are these parts at like the end of some of the chapters where people will like write in questions and he answers them. And this is obviously before I read the anime, when I was just reading the manga. Did I say read the anime? Before I saw the anime, when I was just reading the manga, I saw this question where someone asked about this change, and Oda was kind of like, look, I'm not like totally involved in the anime. It's like a different studio that's doing it. Like I'm helping out and stuff, but they make these decisions, you know, just kind of like trying to like wipe his hands of it and be like, look, man, like I don't make all these calls, you know, and this is still pretty early, you know. But it did make me curious, because I don't remember if they like specifically said what the change was, but I remember thinking like, yeah, that's pretty dark. That's pretty dark.
That would have been a little much, but at the same time, what a gnarly way of showing what it's like being stranded out on sea.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's kind of in that moment though that it's like it washes away like Zeph and Sanji's their like hostility toward each other, because they still bicker and everything, but you can tell like in this moment they really formed a connection, and Zeph tells Sanji straight up like he saved him because Sanji shares his dream of finding the All Blue, which everyone else like kind of laughs at and dismisses, you know. So
it's really a beautiful thing to just show. Like at this point they had no reason to get along, like when they first. But the way that Zeph like took care of Sanji and looked out for him when he clearly did not have to, is just so special.
But they wind up getting rescued by a passing ship, and Zeph reveals like he has this dream of making this ship that's going to be a seafaring restaurant that will feed anyone that's hungry, and so you see that Sanji, after all this, wow, it is really storming here.
I did not expect it to storm like this. I think it'll be okay.
It sets the mood. Oh, but it sets up that Sanji, he feels like he owes Zeph something, because he saved his life, and so now he sees this as like this obligation. Jeez. He has this obligation to help him to pursue this dream, of making this restaurant a reality. But meanwhile, back in the present, Krieg just orders Gin to just kill Zeph. He's like, why are we playing these games? Like, just kill them all. Who cares? And Gin, he's so thankful over being fed that he can't do it. He hesitates. And Luffy, this is when he's kind of like, you know what? I've seen enough. And remember, he sends his foot like way up in the air, and he's like, I'm just going to destroy this whole fucking ship, and just like slams it down. And everyone thinks he's like out of his mind.
It's so silly.
Yeah, Luffy, you see, he is all action. He's no talk. He's just like, let's get this show on the road. Like, I'm sick of this. Yeah, and Luffy, like, he is kind of holding everyone hostage at this point, because he's like, look, if it keeps going like this, I'm just going to sink this ship, which like nobody wants, because Krieg is trying to take this ship,
right.
So it kind of creates this like standoff. And meanwhile, like, Luffy, he actually winds up confronting Sanji, because Sanji makes it clear like he will die to save the Baratie and to save this dream of Zeph's. And Luffy just like throws it back in his face, because he says that only weaklings would repay kindness by dying. And I think this is like, it's very important for his character. But Luffy shows, he as silly as he is, as childish as he is, he does have this kind of maturity that comes out in certain times. And this is one of them, where he's like, why would you sacrifice your life for a thing, like this ship? Like, that's stupid. Like, you should be doing whatever it takes to survive and save everybody else in the process. Like, it's just that simple for Luffy. Like, he is the kind of no-nonsense person who will not, he will not sacrifice anything, And there's this funny moment when, so in the wake of this, Pearl is kind of like ready to end this and just kill them, and Gin winds up actually taking out Pearl and showing that Gin is like, he's not somebody to mess with either, because he's able to take out Pearl in like one hit. And he decides he's going to challenge Sanji and Luffy so they can resolve it without any more bloodshed, because Gin seems to, even though he serves under Krieg, he's not like as like cartoonishly evil, I guess, as Krieg. And it's funny because there's a moment here where Luffy refers to them as being weaklings, and they're all kind of like, what are you talking about? Like, we're the strongest in the East Blue. And he's like, well, isn't that just because there's a lot of you? And immediately you see the pirates all like, oh God, like heads in their hands, like so depressed instantly, because like he cut right to it, and it's like so ice cold. It's so funny. So Luffy's just like completely unimpressed, by all this. But this is when we kind of set up that now Sanji is going to fight Gin, and while Luffy is getting ready to fight Krieg. And when Sanji and Luffy start fighting, it's actually kind of an even fight, but Sanji's like so badly injured from fighting Pearl that he has trouble keeping up with it. And during this, like, Luffy tries to rush at Krieg again to fight him, but Krieg like just pushes him back again, like shoots these stakes at him. I think it is interesting because Luffy, even though he's impervious to a lot of stuff, you can see clearly that there are certain things like, if you're shooting bullets at him, he could just bounce them back, but he's shooting like these spiked stakes, which are actually dangerous. So Luffy gets pushed back again. And this is another exchange that shows the difference in these characters, because Luffy is kind of like, what's going on? Like Luffy cares about fair fights. Like he wants to just go over and fight him, and Krieg doesn't care at all. He just cares about winning, you know. And he has this this idea that like might makes right. You know what I mean? So it's another one of those moments that shows the difference in their morals. Because like with Kuro of the Thousand Plans, you know, he was totally willing to hurt his own crewmates and only cared about himself. And Luffy was like, that makes you a horrible pirate. Like, you're never going to be as good as me. And now with Krieg, it's the idea that like, well, I'm strong, so I get to dictate. Like, I can do whatever I want. But yeah, so when Sanji and Gin are fighting, meanwhile, there is this moment where Sanji, he's just too badly hurt, and Gin has this opportunity to finish him off. But there's another, like, big tearful moment where he can't do it. Like, because Sanji showed him so much kindness, and he explains that, like, no one has ever shown him the kind of kindness that Sanji did by feeding him when he was at his lowest, you know? So he just can't do it. And he begs Krieg to, like, he's like, just this once, please. Like, just let them go. Let's leave. Let's start over. And Krieg, again, showing the difference between him and Luffy is like, you know what? Like, I don't need you. You're weak. Like, if you aren't going to listen to me, then I don't have any use for you. So he launches like a poison bomb over there, and he instructs Gin, like, don't put on your gas mask. Like, you just have to take it. And of course, Gin, being the major simp that he is, he just takes it. And there's this moment where everyone freaks out when the poison bomb goes over there. Luffy's like freaking out because they don't know what to do. And a gas mask kind of just appears, so he puts it on. And it's revealed that, I guess, Gin like threw his gas mask over so Luffy could take it, and he takes another one and puts it on Sanji. So he takes the gas while everyone else is okay.
It's what an incredible act of selflessness.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and he also thinks like Gin still is in this place where he thinks like nobody is going to be able to stand up against Krieg, you know, and Luffy's still just a nobody. So he's like, this is just how it has to be in order to minimize the damage and the loss of life, you know. So this is when we finally get into the big fight of this arc, Krieg versus Luffy. Because at this point, Luffy is, he's kind of pumped up enough where he's like, all right, we need to finish things. Like, he's seen enough. He's seen how Krieg has no regard for his crewmates, and he just can't let this stand anymore. So Luffy, he charges back at him again, and Krieg, I think, even makes a note of like, why do you just keep doing this? Like, this isn't going to get you anywhere. And then that's when we get the reveal that Luffy, he just ran straight through, like, took all the stakes, like, took all this damage. And when he goes in to punch him, Krieg, like, whips out this spiked cape that's, like... He very much is, like, this character who... He relies a lot on weapons and technology and seems to just pull out whatever in the moment will work, you know? But he pulls out this like metal spiked cape or whatever and like wraps it around himself as if like, aha, like can't get me now. And Luffy just punches straight into these spikes. It looks so painful.
yes.
But I mean, he full force just hits it and knocks him on his ass. And this becomes like this big moment where people realize like they're going to have to take Luffy seriously. And so you see, like, his crew is, like, dumbstruck by this. Gin is dumbstruck. Like, they've never seen Krieg get knocked down like that. But meanwhile, Zeph, when he's talking to Sanji, you know, he's reminding him, like, watch this fight. Because he already knew, like, this was coming. And he has a few insights that I thought were so interesting. Because he mentions that, like, he sees Luffy as somebody who... is going to fight to the death if he sees someone as being his enemy. Like, he will not hesitate. And Luffy, you know, he will, like I said, he will hurl himself right into danger without any fear, without any hesitation. And Zeph sees this as, like, Luffy doesn't fear death because he has faith in himself, which I thought that was, like, this, it's a really great way to put that into words. You know, and it definitely, I think that's something we can go back to a lot in the series, that and it's like kind of inspiring in real life too, this idea that he has so much faith in himself that he will not back down, will not, turn around. Like, he will go straight into whatever conflict he is facing.
Yeah, I think I really love how it's shown how powerful Luffy is, not just like physically, but like mentally. Like, he is so set on his goal and beating him and fighting for good that he just keeps getting back up. Yeah.
And it's also worth pointing out that Zeph, he mentions to Sanji that he sees Sanji as being similar to Luffy, but there's something that's holding Sanji back, that he's holding himself back, essentially. And this is kind of part of why he wants him to watch Luffy, because he's hoping he'll get like inspired and understand like what he needs to be doing with his life at this point, which we'll get to that. But yeah, so the fight between them, I did want to point out, like, I think when I first read it, it's another one of those things early on where it's such a goofy, like, D-list. I feel like I keep saying B, C, D, like, whatever. He's like this low-ranking, like, nobody villain. And so reading it was kind of just like, okay, like, let's move this along. Like, I wasn't really hyper-focused on a lot of the stuff. But watching it now, this fight winds up being interesting because while Luffy's still not, like, being pushed to his limits. Like, we're still seeing, like, we mentioned before how he's clearly very strong, but we're not seeing, like, what his boundaries are, what the limits of the strength is. And even in this fight, even though he's kind of getting pushed to the edge, it feels like he's kind of doing it to himself. Like, he treats this fight as like he is just hurling himself at him, kind of proving that, like, it's almost like a way of almost looking down on someone, being like, you aren't even worth it, like, I don't need to, like, strategize or do anything. And it also shows the difference between the two, where Luffy, he relies on himself, on his strength, his spirit, while someone like Krieg is relying on technology and this other bullshit. And Luffy's kind of showing that, like, his strength and spirit is enough to overpower him because he just keeps on coming, keeps just hitting him over and over and over. Like Krieg pulls out this, like, spear that creates explosions or something.
Yeah, this is crazy.
Yeah, and Luffy just keeps hitting the spear over and over and over again, keeps taking the explosions over again until it finally breaks.
Which is a crazy concept fighting-wise, is like he is continuously sacrificing himself for the precise goal of snapping this thing.
Yeah, it's like this absolute determination. And it is also funny because I think when he first hits Krieg, I didn't mention that, like, I think Krieg had said something about how, like, this place is going to be your graveyard, and when Luffy hits him, he's like, oh yeah, like, this is my graveyard, like are you going to rethink that? But yeah, Luffy, he shows no hesitation, just keeps getting up, keeps getting hit. He then starts, like, hammering him on his armor over and over, which Krieg is just like, my armor is indestructible, like, what are you doing? And of course Luffy knows exactly what he's doing, because after hitting it just over and over and over again, he finally, like, cracks it and then hits it with a Gum Gum Bazooka and just shatters it. And at this point, like, Luffy is, like, half conscious. He's, like, lost all his blood and everything, but he is still just going, like, relentlessly. But even then, it's like, it's always like one more thing, because after breaking the armor, Krieg traps Luffy in, like, the steel net and is, like, trying to drag him into the ocean. But Luffy's able to get his arms out, and he, like, grabs him and does a big final attack, this, like, gavel where he, like, twists him up and then slams him like a hammer into the deck and completely knocks him out. And meanwhile, Luffy in this net falls into the sea. But it's still, like, again, that's his character, is like, he's not thinking about all that. He's just thinking about defeating what's in front of him at all costs.
Yeah.
So he kind of, like, sacrifices himself, which is it's a big theme here, that it shows how much he relies on his crew in these moments. And sure enough here, like, Zeph points out to Sanji, he's like, devil fruit users can't swim. And Sanji's like, why didn't you tell me that to begin with? And like jumps in to save Luffy. And I think this is a moment where when he's swimming down to save Luffy, he's like reflecting on everything he saw and like how Zoro and Luffy like put their lives on the line, and without any hesitation in order to pursue their dreams. And it's clear that Sanji is stuck in this place where he's not doing that. He's not living up to, his own ambitions.
Yeah, he's literally like a big fish in a small bowl.
Yeah, it's the same thing that Hawkeye pointed out with Zoro,
Right.
But yeah, so in the aftermath, after Sanji saves Luffy, we see Gin, of course, is crushed by Krieg's defeat. He cannot stand seeing Senpai Krieg getting crushed like this. But at the same time, there's this moment where like Krieg, he gets up and he's like unconscious, like swinging around, like refuses to lose, like cannot accept it. And Gin just knocks him out. And it's kind of like, look, we lost. We have to accept it.
Yeah.
But he still he's unwilling to leave Krieg behind. He sees it as like, we're going to go off, we're going to recover, we're going to head back to the Grand Line, And he explains that he has served under Krieg for so long, even with him being mistreated, he has been so swept up in Krieg's dreams, they've kind of become his own. And what I thought was interesting about this is that it shows like with Luffy, like we say that his crewmates, they all have their own dreams and ambitions, and that's very important, because Luffy absolutely supports everything his crew members are striving for. But at the same time, his crew is like, they're fiercely loyal and willing to put their lives on the line for Luffy and for his dream to become king of the pirates. And with Krieg, you can kind of see how that can go wrong, where Krieg has his own ambitions and his crew has been swept up in it, but Krieg doesn't have any kind of, he doesn't place any value in his crew. They're just like tools to reach his own goals. And it's kind of tragic for Gin, who seems like this good guy, who is very strong in his own right, but he's in this like abusive relationship.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that's exactly what it's literally showing these trappings of being in a toxic relationship, and it's sad. Yeah.
But yeah, so it does wind up being this kind of like this nice moment though when they're all leaving. I think they stack like all of the pirates onto this tiny little boat and with Gin, and Gin is like thankful for everything they did and kind of apologizes before heading out. And meanwhile, the Baratie cooks are just like, yeah, well, don't forget this. Like, don't mess with us again, And so, yeah, in the final moments of this arc, Luffy, he wakes up and freaks out because his hat's missing, and Sanji reveals that he saved it for him. It's another cool thing because we see that a few times, like when Zoro saves his hat from going overboard. It's like seeing that these people like already recognize that this is important to Luffy.
And just how like Nami knew like how important it was, just like, I can fix it.
Yeah, I think all the characters seem to be getting these little moments like that. So Sanji saved his hat for him, and I think Luffy right away is like, all right, so you're coming with us, right? And Sanji's like, no, what are you talking about? Like, still refuses. But we get like, it actually gets, we get a little more serious moment here where Sanji tells him like that he still feels like he owes Zeph. He still owes him something, and Luffy accepts it. He's kind of like, okay, like I understand.
And I also just love that this part of his character where it just shows this like, if they're gonna come with me, they have to have that consent to be with me.
Yeah, and that we get to that too, because then even though he says that, and Luffy accepts it, he then starts like very excitedly talking about the all blue because like Luffy had never heard of it. And there's this moment where Zeph sees him like talking about it. I mean, it's kind of like what we do at the podcast where I'm just like excitedly talking about One Piece while you're just sitting there like, like listening to me.
Yeah, because it's amazing to watch somebody you love talk about something they love.
Yes. But Zeph, like, he sees this, he recognizes, what's going on here. And I think it kind of, it cements for him that like Sanji, it's time for him to leave and to pursue his own dreams. And he thinks that like Luffy is the man to help him to achieve that. So that leads to a scene that's honestly kind of awkward I want to talk about because basically they make food for each other, you know, they're kind of celebrating afterwards. And Sanji makes like the soup, you know, that they're eating. And there's a scene where, like, first of all, they're like very cold to Sanji and like don't have a seat for him. And he's kind of like, okay, guys, like, what the fuck? Okay. And then as they're eating the soup, they're all like complaining about how disgusting it is. And they're like spitting it out and stuff. And even Zeph comes out and he's like, he eats all of the soup because he refuses to let it go to waste. But then he's like, this is trash, and like throws his bowl on the floor. And Sanji the whole time is like, what the hell's wrong with you guys? Like, there's nothing wrong with the soup. And he's like all pissed off and like storms out. And then Luffy, of course, is sitting there happily eating it. Like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. This soup is great. And they're like, we know. But it's this weird thing where I guess they're trying to like be like, we don't need you here in order to get him to leave.
Yeah, they're like faking like pissing him off so that he has this some other outside reason to leave. And I remember watching this for the first time and I was pissed off. I'm like, what the frick is this about?
Kind of being jerk holes.
Yeah, but
I don't know what
jerk hole.
Yeah, they're just being big assholes about it.
Yeah, and how like through this scene, like the mood just shifts because like for me, I was like so pissed off. Like, what are they doing? Yeah. And then it's like, oh.
Well,
I see what they're doing.
It's weird that's like, okay, I guess we're going to gaslight him to make him leave. It's just, yeah, it is very weird. But it is nice because then afterwards they're like, we know the soup's good, all right? Like, we know. And they start eating it again. And, you know, of course, like, Sanji is like sitting outside listening to all of this. And he's like, you idiots. But there is this nice moment you kind of brought up where they ask Luffy to take him. And Luffy's just like, he says no. He's like, he refuses. And they're like, what? Like, I thought you wanted him on your crew. And he's like, yeah, I really want him, but I'm not going to take him unless he agrees to it himself. Yeah. And they're kind of like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. This part of the story is really what like made me fall in love even more with One Piece because it just expresses how fragile and important consent really is. And it's a really, really touching way to show it.
Of course. It's another thing that like differentiates Luffy from a lot of other pirates in this story. But this gets interrupted in a way that feels very awkward. This is when Yusaku shows up in like the mouth of like a shark, like comes crashing through the wall. This I can't remember if this gets explained in the next arc or something, but it's like the most random shit because he just comes flying through the wall. They're kind of like, oh, what's this? And like ignore that like he created this giant hole. It's just like I don't want to say it's lazy because again, I don't remember the setup for this, but I feel like such an awkward way to just shove him into the scene so that he can like set up the next part, which is he tells Luffy that like they followed Nami for a while and figured out where she's going and realized that she's going somewhere that's very dangerous and they need Luffy's help, which is like this really cool, like ominous setup for what's coming. So Luffy's like ready to go in pursuit. And so he winds up gathering all these supplies, like getting all this food from them, which was also funny because he's like, all right, I'll take that, like, come on. And they're like, you need all this? But there's a cool moment where Zeph like offers his logbook to Luffy, and Luffy just immediately turns it down because he's like, "Where's the fun in that? Like, I want to see this for myself."
Yeah, that is such a cool moment because not only just like Zeph being like, "I see what you're doing, I recognize what you want to do, and I want to help," and Luffy's like, "I'm gonna do it all on my own."
Yeah, but it shows how. Like, that's what drives Luffy. Like, yeah, he wants to be king of the pirates, but for him, it's about the adventure. It's about, you know, it's about the freedom and, like, seeing all this stuff for himself, and he's excited about that. So it's like if somebody could spoil it for him or take him right to the end, he's not interested, you know. He's there for the journey.
Yeah, and this might be a stretch. We can cut this if it's stupid. But when I saw this, and, like, just right now thinking about it, I know this is really kind of far-fetched, but the idea of AI right now and like how somebody is that AI is like a logbook to me. Yeah. And it's like you can type in whatever you want and you will make any image or any art you want. but I don't, as AI can be a great tool, but I see it as cheating because why I love art so much is the journey and the adventure and picking up new skills and things like that. And I feel like with AI, it just wipes it of that.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're skipping a lifetime of being inspired and practicing and learning your craft and all of that just to skip right to the end.
Exactly. And it's like, thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah, no, that checks out. But in the final moments, Sanji finally decides, like, okay, like, I guess this is it. You know, this is my chance to leave. He agrees to join with Luffy. And there's this, like, tearful goodbye, of course, as he's leaving, where I think everyone's trying to act, like, all tough and everything. But it breaks when, as they're leaving, Zeph yells out to him not to catch cold. And, like, that's it. Like, that breaks the dam. Everybody starts crying and getting all emotional. And Sanji calls out to him and tells him that he won't forget his kindness for the rest of his life. So it's, like, very heart-wrenching moment. Well, it really shows that the two of them, Sanji and Zeph, they have, like, such a great relationship, you know? Because they're constantly, like, fighting and bickering throughout the whole thing. But as you learn more about their history and all that, you see that there is actually, like, a lot of depth there.
Yeah, I mean, he's like a father figure to him.
Oh, completely. Yeah. Which is interesting because at this point we haven't gotten into Sanji's history or his real backstory yet.
I don't think I've even seen.
You don't know anything about that.
I'm so excited.
That's one of the things. Luckily, we still have to get a fresh perspective on eventually. But yeah, so that does it for the Baratie arc. So now, I guess, as we get into final thoughts, we should start with how would you rank this arc compared to the other ones? Because as a reminder, the way we have it set so far is Orange Town is so far the number one, followed by Romance Dawn, and then Syrup Village is number 3. Mm-hmm. So where would you put Baratie? I think I have an idea.
I don't think you're going to be shocked at all by this. Baratie is my favorite by far right now. It's like, I love Baratie. Like...
Yeah, I think definitely as far as these early arcs go, I'd agree. I think especially rewatching it, it's great. We get the Sanji introduction, we get some really emotional scenes, and then we get more backstory with Zoro, more, Luffy's character gets fleshed out more. There's really a lot that happens here.
Between, like, really cool fight scenes, really emotional moments, a lot of character growth for everyone. Yeah. The character design and the ship design, it's just all so top tier. Like, this is my favorite.
Yeah, this is definitely, I think, to me it feels like this is where Oda starts to really get comfortable and is really, like, he's really getting into the what am I trying to say? He's really getting into the swing of things, you know, with this series at this point. And I will just say, so the next arc that we're covering, we're getting ready to do the legendary Arlong Park arc, which this was something that when we first started, I remember telling you, you know, we have to at least get through Arlong Park. And after that point, you know, you can kind of decide if you're a One Piece head or not, like me. And that, I feel like that's like a really common sentiment in the community, because Arlong Park, aside from just being like a fantastic arc in this series, like it's still one of my favorite. It's the first like big major arc that shows like what One Piece is about and what the storytelling is like going forward, because we see a lot more of, we'll get into it when we talk about it, but there's a lot that happens in Arlong Park that really sets the table for the rest of the series. It's also the first like real threat that Luffy faces, because we talked a lot about how these villains are kind of like, you know, monster of the week, just whatever, people, like very disposable. This is going to be our first big villain that actually is a threat to Luffy. and our appliances are constantly singing to us. But yeah, so I'm very excited to get into this again. This is going to be a big one. I think we're already planning on probably doing this in 2 parts, which we'll do like a week apart, because we have to dedicate as much time to this as we can to make sure we do it right. But yeah, so on that note, the next arc, Arlong Park, it covers episodes 31 through 44 of the anime and chapters 69 through 95 of the manga. So it's the longest arc so far. And yeah, like I said, I'm excited to watch it. I'm excited to talk about it. I can't wait. And just as a programming note, I think after that's Logetown, which is like the final arc of the East Blue saga. And then we're going to do an East Blue recap where we'll spend part of it just talking about the podcast and the process, what everything's been like. But then we're going to give some kind of like general thoughts about the whole East Blue saga and, just put a cap on it before we head into the next saga when we enter the Grand Line, as a spoiler alert. So yeah, did you have any overall thoughts for this arc you wanted to get out before we close it?
I think I pretty much expressed how much I love this arc and the addition of Sanji.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's
Even
pretty well expressed.
I think, like we said the first time, I think you still weren't like totally on the Sanji train at this point, but we're all aboard this time.
Yes, we're all aboard for Sanji.
All right, so do you want to plug the socials and stuff?
Yeah, we're Straw Hat Social Club everywhere, including Threads.
Oh,
So now we're on Threads because Threads released this week, which I am addicted to. But otherwise, if you have an anime movie that you want us to check out, or maybe some sort of anime short, you can send it to strawhatsocialclub@gmail.com. And yeah.
Well, and also, I think genuinely, if anyone has any thoughts on like doing more thorough beat by beat recaps versus more conversational, like we're still kind of trying to figure out, what we're doing here. So definitely appreciate any kind of feedback.
Yes, please.
And yeah, for the socials, I'd say we're primarily Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and now I guess Threads. I don't know what you're doing on there. You're the social media person.
I mean, I'm trying. Threads is obviously a new platform with new energy. I think it really has a good vibe to it, so we'll see. But it'll definitely be more laid back.
We should definitely couch that by saying it's still Zuckerberg and maybe not.
I mean, like, what am I supposed to do?
I'm just saying.
Of course,
it's all social media. It's all got its own problems, but
I'm not here throwing an ad for Threads, but
I know.
I mean, it exists, and there's over 70 million people on it at this point. So
yeah. All right, but I think that will do for this time. I think the plan is, we're going to do, I guess now we can actually talk about schedule stuff because
and also
we have more of a calendar now.
Yeah, and also I think any One Piece fan knows that the live action is coming out very soon.
Oh yeah, we're planning on finishing all of the East Blue saga right before the live action show comes out. It's part of why we did Syrup Village and Baratie back to back to kind of get ahead of it. But I think next week, take a break with Side Piece. We're going to be releasing Sailor Moon R on there. That's your next choice.
Yes.
And then after that, it'll be Arlong Park, which again should be a 2-parter, 2 weeks apart. So yeah, I mean, we appreciate anyone who's listening.
Yeah, it's been really cool seeing the subscribers keep tacking on and seeing how many downloads we're getting. It's not like substantial, but it's cool that you guys are out there listening. So
yeah, I think we'll go more in depth and all that when we do like the East Blue recap. But it is nice because we're really just doing this for fun for the two of us. It's just fun to make something together. So seeing that there are people listening is cool. I hope people are enjoying it.
Yeah, you
can catch us next Thursday. This has been Straw Hat Social Club. I'm Todd.
I'm Becca.
And tune in next time.